Good morning. Spring is on the way. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Flint. If you are new to us, let me tell you a bit about us. We are an inclusive church that welcomes everyone, regardless of their income, education, or sexuality. If you are searching for a church that believes love, the quest for justice, and the use of reason, these are important things to us, and this congregation may be right for you. If you would like more information about UUism or our congregation, please feel free to contact one of the ministers or our church office. The contact information can be found at uuflint.org. Now for some important announcements. Save the date, March 21st, from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. at the UUCF parking lot. A fun event you will not want to miss. Now it's a secret though. We don't know what it is. Special surprises and lots of friendly faces guaranteed. More to come, but for now, just put it on your calendar. Another announcement, show your support for Black Lives Matter and make a difference. Please join the members of Flint's Woodside Church on the courthouse lawn every Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. to support the Black Lives Matter movement. Woodside has invited us to join them in this persistent, insistent witness. So let's add our presence to the effort. Fight injustice and your winter doldrums at the same time. If it is below 20 degrees, they will not meet. However, we're on the uptick for our weather. An important announcement that just came in, I feel like this is breaking news. On Sunday, February 14th, white supremacists Zoom bombed the online service of the community Unitarian Universalists in Brighton, Michigan. As you may know, Zoom bombing is the sudden disruption of an online meeting that involves profanity and threats. This virtual assault came while the Brighton UUs were celebrating the legacy of civil rights achievements. Threats were made against their minister, Reverend Julie Broke, who wrote a letter to the perpetrators assuring them the Brighton congregation would not be silenced, and expressed regret that the attackers were filled with such hate. If you would like to voice your support for the Brighton congregation, you can email them at minister@cuub.org. That's minister@cuub.org. Join us for coffee hour after the service on Zoom. The ID can be found on our website, on our Facebook page, and in the e-update. We will now begin our service with a prelude by Jennifer Howard. For our chalice lighting this morning, fire consumes and casts a bright light. May our chalice flame consume our regrets of the past, our fears about the future, and our worries about today. May it light for us a path of joy and peace. Would you please join me in reciting our covenant? recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service, we gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice.
Good morning. Our opening words come from Tim Haley. Amid all the noise in our lives, we take this moment to sit in silence, to give thanks for another day, to give thanks for all those in our lives who have brought us warmth and love, and to give thanks for the gift of life.
Our meditation this morning is a prayer for weary times. Our hearts are weary, tired, breaking. Our hearts are stretching as they are pulled, pushed, bruised, and battered by all of the suffering and pain. Our ears are ringing with harsh words and yelling. We've heard stories of equality and justice, but our eyes burn from the instances of inequality and racism, showing how far we have to go. Our mouths speak words of hope, of courage, and of truth. But at times we find that words do no justice. The brokenness feels too big. May we speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Find our voice. See beyond this brokenness to a time of true community. May we remember that the only journey toward healing is one that is paved through humility and acceptance of responsibility and counteracting complacency. Ours is not a solitary journey, but one taken together, deeply rooted in love. In 1952, a black man from the South wrote his first novel, and it won the National Book Award in 1953. His book is now listed among the top 100 American novels. Our reading today is from Ralph Waldo Ellison's Invisible Man.
I denounce hate because, though implicated and partially responsible, I have been hurt to the point of abysmal pain, hurt to the point of invisibility. And I defend because, in spite of it all, I find that I love.
What And how much had I lost by trying to do only what was expected of me instead of what I myself wanted to do?
When I discover who I am, I'll be free.
Life is to be lived, not controlled, and humanity is won by continuing to play in the face of certain defeat.
I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I'm a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible simply because people refuse to see me.
I was never more hated than when I tried to be honest, or when, even as just now, I've tried to articulate exactly what I felt to be the truth. No one was satisfied.
I remember that I'm invisible and walk softly so as not to wake the sleeping ones. Sometimes it's best not to awaken them. There are few things in the world as dangerous as sleepwalkers.
Perhaps to lose a sense of where you are implies the danger of losing a sense of who you are.
I do not know if all cops are poets, but I know that all cops carry guns with triggers.
I was pulled this way and that for longer than I can remember. And my problem was that I always tried to go in everyone's way but my own. I have also been called one thing and then another, while no one really wished to hear what I called myself. So, after years of trying to adopt the opinions of others, I finally rebelled. I am an invisible man.
Whence all this passion towards conformity anyway? Diversity is the word. Let man keep his many parts, and you will have no tyrant states. Why, if they follow this conformity business, they'll end up by forcing me, an invisible man, to become white, which is not a color, but the lack of one. Must I strive towards colorlessness? But seriously, and without snobbery, think of what the world would lose if that should happen. America is woven of many strands. I would recognize them and let it so remain.
Everywhere I've turned, someone has wanted to sacrifice me for my own good. Only they were the ones who benefited. And now we start on the old sacrificial merry-go-round. At what point do we stop?
Some things are just too unjust for words and too ambiguous for either speech or ideas.
I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you sometimes see in circus sideshows, it is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, they see everything and anything except me.
Yeah, it said, believe me, missy, when you're born to be a sissy without the vim and vibe. But I could change me habits and no more be scared of rabbits if I only had the knife. I'm afraid there's no denying I'm just a dandelion, a fate I don't desire. I could show me prowess, be a lion, not a mouse, if I only had a knife. Oh, I'd be on my stride, a king down to the core. I would roar like you ain't never heard before, and then I'd ruff and roar some more. I would show the dinosaurus who's king around his forest, a king day's better soy. And with my regal breezer I could be another Caesar if I only had a knife.
In a private room of the Willie A. Watkins Funeral Home in Atlanta, Georgia, on July 17th, last year, 2 closed caskets rested side by side, holding the bodies of 2 civil rights leaders. 15 years apart in age, and their places in history solidified just a month apart in 1965 in Selma, the Reverend Cordy Tyndall, or C.T. Vivian, and Congressman John Robert Lewis had died within hours of one another. Lewis and Vivian had met 60 years prior when they studied together at the American Baptist College in Nashville, Tennessee, and then worked in civil rights as part of the Nashville student movement. Both were Presidential Medal of Freedom recipients from President Obama and young lieutenants of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But a lot fewer people knew about C.T. Vivian. The fact that he died on the very same day as John Lewis overshadowed his death. But by all accounts, Vivian would have been decidedly against having people make a fuss over him anyway. Ambassador Andrew Young, in his eulogy for Vivian, said, "He didn't want attention, he didn't want money, he only wanted to do God's will and bring out the best in the United States and its people, regardless of their race, creed, color, or national origin." Today is the last of our series of reflections on our congregation's motto, love, justice, reason, in faith. I'd like to share how doing the work of justice within faith communities has helped make invisible people be seen and the voiceless be heard since the founding of our country. We are approaching a time of great opportunity in America when the good society the founding mothers and fathers believed they had achieved could finally be realized. Since the birth of this country, we have relied on those who Martin Luther King once called the creatively maladjusted to instigate societal change. Those are people that don't accept the way things are. They aren't willing to support a democracy that excludes certain people. The creatively maladjusted are like those that African-American author Ralph Ellison wrote about in Invisible Man. They are the people that know that some things are just too unjust for words and too ambiguous for either speech or ideas. And so, those people do something. People like John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. The country was introduced to Lewis after his skull was fractured on Bloody Sunday in Selma on national television. Vivian was likewise best known for a punch he received on national television in Selma as well. Vivian's blow happened to arrive first and resulted in 11 stitches and jail time. In fact, Vivian's beating would ultimately be the catalyst for Lewis and over 600 people to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, only to be confronted and brutally attacked by state troopers. That happened 56 years ago today, March 7th, 1965. Afterwards, a call from Martin Luther King went out to all clergy in the country to gather in Selma for protest. 3 UU ministers that answered that call were my mentor, Clark Olson, Orloff Miller, and James Reeb. Reeb would die from a beating that he received just a few days later. Now, some people say that the murder of a white clergyman was the last straw and finally sealed the passing of the Voting Rights Act of '65. Perhaps that dried the ink. Plenty of workers that were on the front lines in February of '65 say that Vivian's experience was the paper that the bill was written upon. You see, Selma was the civil rights hotspot at that time because 28,000 black citizens there were not registered to vote. And Vivian, who was the director in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference at the time, went there to help. And this day, for which he is most remembered, he put on a dark suit, a collared shirt, he wrapped a scarf around his neck, he put on freshly shined shoes and a tweed overcoat, and he stepped out into a cold and rainy Selma February. Although it was customary in those days to wear a hat, he decided against it because in his type of work, hats were often lost. First, he walked to the Brown Chapel AME Church to pray and to greet a crowd of about 40 people or so, reminding them to be nonviolent even if they were beaten. Then they all processed to the Dallas County Courthouse, where Sheriff Jim Clark, who liked cattle prods and a George Patton-inspired World War II helmet, waited, along with his deputies and TV news crews. Vivian announced at the top of the steps at the courthouse that they had come to register to vote. Clark told him that the courthouse was closed as all the marchers stood in the rain. Vivian retorted, whenever anyone does not have the right to vote, then every man is hurt. You don't want them to register because you would no longer be able to use your brutality on them. Clark then turned away, and Vivian proclaimed in his Baptist preacher voice, "You can turn your back on me, but you cannot turn your back upon the idea of justice. You can turn your back now, and you can keep the club in your hand, but you cannot beat down justice." The white crowd began to mock Vivian as he continued to preach his message. And then Vivian started a call and response from his marchers. Sheriff Clark had finally had enough. He demanded the cameras and lights be turned off, and the deputies began pushing the marchers off the courthouse stairs. And then Clark, who would say for the rest of his life that he never remembers doing it, punched Vivian in the face with such a blow that Vivian tumbled down to the bottom of the stairs. And Clark fractured his finger. Vivian recalls that his head was throbbing and blood was streaming down his face along with the pouring rain. And many thoughts swirled in his mind, including that the smartest thing would have been to stay on the ground. But Vivian says he knew he had to get up to show that he was not afraid. He later recalled that he felt that he had to get up or people would think that they had been defeated by violence. He said, "Everything I am as a minister, as an African American, as a civil rights activist, as a struggler for justice for everyone came together in that moment." He said, "You find out what people say they value, and then you hold them accountable to it." Vivian showed that he had the nerve. Just like Lewis did a month later crossing that bridge. And just like Reverend Clark Olson, Reverend Orloff Miller, and Reverend James Reeb did when they answered the call from Martin Luther King for what he might have called creatively maladjusted clergy to join him in Selma, to say that what had happened was wrong and we stand with you. White and black alike knew in those days that they risked their lives every time they marched or sat or yelled, every time they stood up to police. And in the case of 3 white ministers simply going to a black restaurant for dinner, it cost a life. Or Viola Liuzzo, who also, a woman in white, was shot in the head by the KKK as she shuttled marchers between Montgomery and Selma. Vivian also knew his life was at risk when he rose on those steps, but he continued to speak. "We're willing to be beaten for democracy," Vivian went on. "And you misuse democracy in the street. You beat people bloody in order that they don't have the privilege to vote. Well, we are willing to die for democracy, Sheriff Clark." This wasn't the first time Vivian had fought for his rights. His first nonviolent protest began in 1947 when he organized a successful campaign of sit-ins to end segregation at lunch counters in Peoria, Illinois. 1947. This was years before bus boycotts and famous MLK speeches. Vivian was passionate about his rights and his religion. At 5 years old, he tells the story that his grandmother told him to stay home from church. He remembers running outside and laying in the rut of a road and told her that he would let cars run over him if he couldn't go to Sunday service. Because Vivian said church was where life happened. People were engaged and diverse, and they sang loud and clear, and it was the one place where everyone was black and everyone was equal. And Vivian believed in his heart that racism was a moral issue. And he found that there was an inseparable bond between civil rights and ministry for him. And throughout his life, Vivian relied on his faith to help him as he traveled the often dangerous but righteous path that he believed would ultimately make African Americans be seen as fellow human beings, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In his posthumous memoir, It's in the Action, Memories of a Nonviolent Warrior, which is going to come out in just a few days, Vivian discusses why he believed the church played such a vital role in the civil rights movement. He wrote that blacks had to believe that they would be taken care of and God would be the only one to do it because although America was a democracy, democracy wasn't for African Americans. From the time of slavery in America to the Black Lives Matter movement, there has been a common thread of faith in the struggle for racial justice. The role of Black spiritual leaders changed from promising otherworldly rewards in the afterlife to something demanding justice in the earthly realm. More recently, this philosophy has evolved into the popular Ubuntuism, a worldview Archbishop Desmond Tutu described as one's own humanity that is inextricably bound up with that of others. Our own UU principles are written in a similar vein and essentially affirm seeing that basic humanity is something we share and it cannot be separated. But the key is seeing all humanity. The invisible man says, I am invisible simply because people refuse to see me. And I believe, much like the character, African Americans, the poor, homeless, all minorities and oppressed are simply not seen. And furthermore, the oppressors often don't see themselves as such. They look past problems. This almost unconscious racism and all the many isms we have that we face, one of the most challenging aspects of justice work. If we cannot convince others that there is a problem, we cannot get them to help us with that solution. In 2015, C.T. Vivian addressed this issue when he was interviewed at a Unitarian Universalist event remembering the 50th anniversary of Selma. He said that we all need to get ready for billionaires to run everything, and those at the bottom don't make it and won't make it. And he then referred to an organization like ours and said, and that's where ministry comes in and has meaning. That's where churches that care about people come in. I believe that if our UU congregations grow, if there are enough of us that can come together and support those people who have the nerve, our national leaders wouldn't be able to ignore us. Just as we have seen a great deficit recently of love and reason in our country, justice has been far from abundant. This makes our UU communities more relevant than ever. And I promise you that ordinary free thinkers out there are looking for ways to put their frustration to constructive use. That is not only what we do, it is truly who we are to the core. But the truly great inspirational civil rights leaders of the past are gone, some people say. And the civil rights movement that we knew is nothing like Black Lives Matter today, for instance. Well, let's not let that stop us. I believe there's 3 things that can help us fight the next battle on the courthouse steps. First, I'm reminded of a quote a century ago by Reverend Lewis Fisher, who was the dean of the St. Lawrence Seminary. And he was asked about where Universalists stand. And he said, "We do not stand, we move." Secondly, let's not forget that we have intelligent, motivating, and young up-and-coming leaders. People like Stacey Abrams, the first black woman to win a major party's nomination for governor. Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Global Network. Rashad Robinson, who uses online petitions for social change. Brian Stevenson, a lawyer that's helped 135 wrongly accused people get off of death row. Dorcetta Taylor, an advocate during the Flint water crisis and a climate change expert. And the Reverend William Barber II, pastor and the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. He is considered to be the natural successor to past civil rights leaders. At the passing of Lewis and Vivian, Barber wrote on his Facebook page, "Imagine if we had really listened to Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. Instead, what we've had is a compassion deficit. If we were all moved with compassion," he said, "next week we could pass health care for all, then living wages for all. We could restore voting rights for all. We could feed the hungry and house the homeless if we were moved with compassion." Lastly, we must continue to remember that there is serious work to do. Even today, a bill to protect voting rights is in peril. And just weeks ago, as you heard, the Brighton, Michigan UUs were virtually attacked by white supremacists during their service on civil rights. No cracked skulls or stitches in these incidents, thankfully. Although we have seen recently deaths of innocent African Americans. There are still millions of socially and economically marginalized people that can't get to the top of the courthouse steps. And now, even Asian Americans are experiencing hate crimes because of COVID and people who think it's their fault. Listen, we can't wait until things get worse. Many Americans have already taken moments where they stand up against racism and hatred. But what we need now is movement. That's why congregations like ours, with justice making at the heart of our mission, are so vital. Faith carried people like Lewis and Vivian through the trials of their lives, and faith informs our UU values. Why not communicate and collaborate with people who think and believe like us? Our congregation should not be a secret. We are a congregation of love, justice, and reason in faith. Let's make it real. Make it a living, breathing motto and draw others in with us. I don't know that we'll ever have leaders to guide us again that are like Gandhi or MLK or John Lewis or C.T. Vivian. But I know that we can continue to find inspiration in their words and their work and their lives. And as Dr. Gerald Durley said in his eulogy to his lifelong friend, C.T. Vivian, he said, he was always serious about uplifting people economically and educationally. CT was always organizing, he was always strategizing, and he could strategize and mobilize and motivate you. And when you would sit down, he would always say, Now what are you going to do about it? May it be so.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome someday.
Our time for generosity. At this time in our service, we talk of the offering. Do you ever think, how much is enough? How much should I give? Consider what you have received and give until it feels good. You can do this online at uuflint.org or by sending your check to the church office. No matter the size, all that is given is deeply appreciated.
We are not done. Progress is slow, like the cha-cha. Forward, then back. Forward, then back. We are not done, but we must keep dancing. Go in peace.
And now let us extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.